What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Always Hope podcast, a production of Willwood's Faith and Marriage. This is Dr. Mario Sakasa, and I pray that you're just having an amazing day today. Well, what is the goal of the education system, and how should a Catholic education differ from others? If you are an educator, a school administrator, or have kids in school, I promise that you need to pay attention to this episode. Joining me on the show to have this very important conversation is Dr. Brett Salkeld, archdiocesan theologian for the Archdiocese of Regina in Canada, and author of the book, Educating for Eternity, A Teacher's Companion for Making Every Class Catholic. In today's show, we discuss how the goals of education should aim higher than just forming productive citizens of society, the importance of knowing how your values influence your teaching, how to appropriately integrate Catholicism into the various teaching disciplines, and the need to avoid indoctrination and political fearmongering. Among other topics, this is a very free-flowing conversation that I know you're going to enjoy. If you find this episode helpful, please share with one other person who you think would benefit from it, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. God bless everybody, and let's get into this conversation with Dr. Brett Salkeld. Dr. Brett Salkeld, welcome to the Always Hope podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Mario.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, I had the pleasure of being on your show, the Thinking Faith podcast. That was maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, I can't remember, to talk about dating well. And I had a wonderful conversation. We broke that up into two parts. We were talking about dating and your book also on chastity that you released a number of years ago. And I actually did release the audio for that on my podcast too. So maybe some of the listeners heard that conversation and are familiar at least with the name. But I'm grateful to have you back to be able to talk about your latest book, Educating for Eternity, which is a great book that speaks about how we can integrate, I would say, our faith into our discipline, and particularly the discipline of education. And what does it really mean for a Catholic education? Like, what does that really mean to have a Catholic education? And so, Brett, I'm looking forward to our conversation, and let's just jump right into this, okay? So, what is Catholic academic integration? That's a big word right there, big words. What does that mean? Like, what does that mean to you, and why is that important?
Right. Yeah. So Catholic academic integration is one term that is used. Other people refer to something as curriculum permeation. Most people who work in Catholic education will have heard something like you should infuse your lessons or your teaching with a Catholic worldview or with your faith. Now, there's at one level we do this, just by trying to live virtuously, trying to be generous and kind and honest, and all those things that we want to do to be the people we want to be in our relationships. But Catholic academic integration is a way of being a little more specific. Of course, we want to do those other things in our school, and that's an important part of their Catholic identity. But Catholic academic integration kind of drills down and specifies teaching the actual subject matter of our specific disciplines, so the academic disciplines, from a Catholic point of view. So we're integrating our Catholic worldview into our teaching of health, science, math, literature. And the book has 8 chapters, one for each of 8 sort of core academic disciplines. And it's a matter of recognizing at the front end that we're teaching our subject areas from some point of view or other. It's easy to kind of imagine that we teach something like math from a neutral point of view. And the argument I make in the book and in any presentations I do and stuff like that is that you don't actually get that option. You're going to teach even math with a set of presuppositions about what your goals are, what math means, what it means for our relationship with reality, what it means for God's creation. And if you haven't thought about them intentionally, that doesn't mean you're not implying them in your teaching. It just means you're sort of camouflaging it, and you're not clear about what you're doing. But we're always teaching from some point of view with some set of goals, with some basic worldview. And so I try to, in the book, help us think about what a Catholic worldview is as it relates to something like math or any of the other subjects, and walk that through, and then get us thinking, well, and then what does that mean for our classroom instruction? How does that change? It doesn't change, the 2 + 2 is 4. But if 2 + 2 is 4 means something different in a worldview where, we do math because we're stewards of God's creation who pursue truth and beauty, that's a different worldview than we need to get enough skills to make a buck to afford some creature comforts. Now, that second one's not actually false. We actually do need to do that. But if that's your whole picture for why you should study math, you have a very different worldview and approach to what you're doing, right?
Yeah. I get you. That's beautiful. Okay, so it's about getting back to like the foundational elements here and asking questions about what is education? Why do we educate? What's really the goal? What's the purpose here? All that stuff that we're going to be dissecting, I think, throughout our episode. But just to kind of reframe this, I would say, and I think it's Pope Francis, if I remember correctly, kind of talking about Catholic education. He said that the danger sometimes is that we can just fall into a Catholic veneer, or that we think if we just create this veneer, if we just have the crucifix hanging on the wall, like that's enough. Hey, it's Catholic. We got Catholic name, we got the Catholic elements kind of looking at us back in the face. It's like, that's enough. And the truth is, well, that's a start, but that isn't sufficient. There's more that has to happen there. And part of the challenge, though, I would say for educators, especially as they're learning, again, you do a wonderful job in the book going through the second part of the specific disciplines there. But the challenge is that most of us, myself included, don't have degrees in theology. And so, it's like, well, how do we, I hear what you're saying, which is that I should infuse my Catholic faith into my practice. I should look at mathematics, for example, as you stated, not just about the simple math, which is important, but like the meaning behind what we're trying to accomplish. But if I'm not educated enough to really know what that looks like, or what it really means to operate from a Catholic academic integration, or to be able to have this integrated perspective, I mean, it can be really challenging for somebody who has professed to be Catholic. They are Catholic. They believe their faith. They live their faith, but they're educating, and not even just educating, I would say maybe even operating in a space where they don't really know how to bring their faith appropriately or integrate it appropriately into the work that they do.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the problem that was in the background when I wrote the book in the first place. So here in Canada, we have, at least in some provinces, including my own, Saskatchewan, we have publicly funded Catholic education, but we don't have any post-secondary institutes that train Catholic teachers, which is, this is actually a disaster. That you would train people in a secular university that is getting further and further from Catholic ideals on a whole range of issues, and then hire them to work in a Catholic school and tell them to, infuse their teaching with Catholic worldview. And they've had no training in this. And most of their worldview has been set by the media and their education and, these other sort of meta factors. Often without a lot of sort of even self-awareness that that's where it's coming from, right? And so actually it was a group of teachers from Regina who approached me and said, look, our school division is asking us to do this. It's the buzzword. It sounds like a good idea. We don't know how to do it. And so I did a series of talks for them that formed the basis for a lot of the second half of the book, because I did a couple of foundational talks at the beginning about, faith and reason and that kind of thing. But then I walked through, like, we had a night on history and social studies and a night on math and science and that kind of stuff. And I think on the one hand, it looks intimidating to start, but once you start, you realize that it's quite doable. It's really a shift in our imagination. Most of what we take as our worldview, we're not actually intentional about recognizing where it comes from or whether it comports with what we profess to believe as Catholics or not. It's just kind of the background noise of the way things are. And one of my tasks in the book is to just start changing our imaginations so that something that looks just obvious and neutral and background noise starts to actually take on some character as like, no, that's a real claim about the way the world is. And now that I recognize it as such, I can ask, do I actually believe that? And how does that line up with what I think I believe according to my Catholic faith? And what does that mean for my in the long run, what does it mean for my teaching of my subject area? And so there is a certain level of expertise that you need to take on. Not everyone needs to be a theologian, but if you're a Catholic science teacher, you need to know not just science, but you need to know something about the conversation of faith and science if you're going to teach science in a Catholic school. If you're a literature teacher, of course you need expertise in literature, but you need to know something about a Catholic approach to literature and the Catholic literary heritage, right? It's and to imagine that you don't have you have some attitude towards that already. You don't have nothing. You have some attitude, and so the question is, like, what is that? And in the book and in all the professional development work I'm doing with teachers, I try to sort of open up the imagination to this other way of thinking. And my sense is that sort of once you get it, it starts showing up everywhere. Like it seems like a huge task because it's like you have to learn everything all over again with these new lenses, but not really. It's once you get the new lenses and you learn to recognize the subtle, presuppositions that were hidden in the background, you get good at it pretty quick, actually. Like I find working with teachers, once you give them 2 or 3 examples and they get it, they'll turn around and give you 2 or 3 more that you hadn't thought of yourself because they're experts in their area. And once they've been given the lenses to see it, they can see it. So it's not as intimidating a prospect as it kind of appears at first.
Yeah. No, I get you. And I agree. And I understand what you're saying because from my profession, my discipline as a therapist, my training all came from secular institutions. I did go to a Catholic school for my PhD, but the program, the counseling department itself was largely a secular department, I would say. And so most of my education has been in a secular arena. And so I've learned over the years how to integrate my faith, within my work. And I've tried to do that from the get-go. And I've skewed, in some directions that are too overly spiritual, and then less so, so anyways, you always have to find kind of the magic kind of line and what that looks like. And so I think I feel comfortable where I stand now in terms of how I integrate my faith in my work as a therapist. And I try to help young people, people find me because of the podcast and speaking engagements that I do. They're like, hey, I just graduated with a degree in counseling. I want to know how to be able to integrate my faith. Can we have a couple meetings? Can we set something up? And so, yeah, graciously, I'm happy to, pay it forward, so to speak, with others and help them try to find those points of connection. And one of the places that I often start is exactly where you start with the book, which is that what are the presuppositions that we've been trained under? And one of those presuppositions is as therapists, and I imagine it's similar in most kind of liberal, secular industries or disciplines, I would say, is that we have to be value neutral. We have to be value neutral, value neutral. But to be value neutral is a value also. So it's always the irony.
Exactly.
It's like to say there is no truth is a truth statement. So there's no way around the fact that you can't help but bring your worldview, your perspective, your presuppositions into the conversation. And so one of the examples I often give is regarding, marriage. And I say, so if we're working with a couple and they're coming to see us, then if we take a stance where we think divorce is permissible and we think it's okay kind of freely, then the questions we're going to ask subtly, but the questions we're going to be asking to navigate the couple, especially if they're on the brink, are going to more than likely that bias is going to come out in the questioning. You think you would talk about this in the book, researcher bias, counselor bias. It's going to come out, in the way that you ask questions and what you're exploring, what you're looking for, what you're not looking for, how you set the parameters up, that whole bit. It's going to come out. And that's no knock. That's just what it is. And so, but if you believe in the permanence of marriage and at least in trying to uphold this union as much as possible. Now, again, divorce, I understand, still happens, and the church has given us annulments, and I get all that. Okay, so setting that aside for right now, this isn't a conversation about that. But just that if that's a perspective that you have, then the questions are going to come out in a certain way that's going to guide, that end. And there's ways to be able to do even that in a way that doesn't impose your values necessarily, but still gives people freedom to choose ultimately at the end of the day what they're going to choose. But still, the fact that we're not, we're not a blank slate. You know what I mean? Like it's like there's something there that we have to be attentive to what it is. And so we do have a certain duty, and I agree with what you're saying. Doesn't mean we'll have to go get master's in theology degrees, but we at least have to have some working knowledge of what the faith does in fact say about the discipline that we're engaged in.
Right. And this value neutral claim, as you point out, it's a value claim.
Right.
Just
right.
like,
Absolutely.
there is no such thing as truth as a truth claim.
Yeah.
And so but what happens with there is, if I say, look, my values are coming in one way or another, so I should investigate what they are and be aware of how they're impacting what I'm doing, I'm actually in a much healthier position with respect to the other person's freedom than if I say I'm values neutral, when in fact that's impossible. And so, one question about Catholic academic integration is like, isn't that indoctrination? And in a way, it's the opposite of indoctrination, because it takes the expectations and the presuppositions, and it clarifies them, and it labels them explicitly. So if some student comes to a Catholic school and doesn't agree with, a Catholic worldview on every point, we're not imposing anything on that student, but we're being very clear about, and we can engage with people of goodwill who disagree with us. I mean, that's a great thing to do in a Catholic school. We don't demand agreement, which just leads to inauthenticity anyways, right? You have to engage people in their freedom. But if what you do instead is pretend that what you're doing is value neutral, and you believe that yourself, you're actually, when someone's values run up against yours, you think that you're neutral and they have values. So what has to happen in that conflict? They just need to stop having them. And I listened to an amazing recording that took place in a Canadian high school the other day. It was a teacher, she was livid. A bunch of Muslim students had skipped Pride Day. Wow. And she was, and it was amazing how respectful they were being. But she was haranguing them for how hateful they were. And they were obviously not hateful people. They were very, but the point is, she couldn't see that she was making value claims. She thought celebrating Pride was a neutral thing, and that these people whose cultures and parents and religion were against this were just, and she called them terrible things. And awful. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, some of these kids might come along with you. Others of them are going to become fundamentalists. I mean, if you tell someone that their family, these were her words, disgusting haters. If you call people's family and religion disgusting and hateful, you're going to generate a backlash, right? But why do I tell this whole story? Because she imagined she was being neutral, and they were the ones who were imposing values. Yeah. And when you listen to the conversation, they were far closer to neutral. There is no neutral, but they were aware that they were making a claim from a particular standpoint, and that allowed them to engage with honesty. And she was unaware, and that led her to be dishonest.
Amen. Exactly. So if she would have at least been sincere within herself and to say, well, my value stance is that I believe that homosexuality is okay, and that we should, not just okay, but is encouraged, and that it's a normal,
should be celebrated
in a public institution. Exactly.
And that other people should be forced to celebrate it. I mean, that's what she was saying, right?
That's the value claim, exactly. Right. That's not value neutral. I mean, there's just no way around that. But I mean, she obviously would believe that she is, and unfortunately, that is the stance that is just common. It's like, well, you're wrong because you have a belief system that's different than mine. Well, why does that work?
Right.
How about we actually agree to understand? How about we actually work to understand what our respective belief systems are and the origins of them, and to actually have conversations about it. Right. Because then we can actually have dialogue.
Catholic academic integration should equip us well to have conversations with people who disagree, because we've been honest about our own commitments. So sometimes the question is, isn't that indoctrination? And a cheeky answer you can give is like, if you do it wrong, right? But that's not what we're asking you to do, right? We're asking us to be intentional here, not to be coercive, right?
Yeah. Okay. So years ago, this was a case that most counseling students learn about, because it's what ended up changing the code of ethics. There was a student in Michigan who in her class, she was if I remember correctly, the circumstance was she was in a practicum in her institution, and they had asked her to counsel a homosexual couple, and she said that she didn't want to based on, her religious convictions, and just simply said, "Listen, I'm fine seeing anybody. They can see whoever else they want in the agency, whatever the case might be, But because of that, the school then turned on her and said that she was imposing her values, that she doesn't have a right to not see people based on their orientation, and preference and all of that. And so in that situation, and then there's another situation that was similar. Both of these are kind of talked about in tandem at Augusta State University, that a very similar kind of experience happened. Now, I know in the Augusta State University one, the recommendation that the school had for her to be able to come back to be in good standing with the school, or I apologize, I can't remember if it was the Michigan or the Augusta State one, so I don't want to be erroneous. In one of those two cases, the remediation was for her to have to attend some type of gay pride event. So it was like, right, she had to apologize to the agency or apologize to the school. And then not only that, but also take an extra step to show her support by attending some, gay pride event. And I was like, right, how is that not indoctrination?
Right. Exactly. And you might
how
even
is that
think
not indoctrination? I mean, like, right, we can talk about the differences in living in a pluralistic society and how we can be respectful of different opinions. I'm fine with that conversation. We need to have that conversation, but you can't then say that the only way forward is for you you can't say it's value neutral to claim that the only way forward is for you to do exactly what I'm doing.
Right. Public obeisance.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
There's interesting data about how certain kinds of things like sensitivity training often actually lead to counter results from what they're supposed to. Now, I don't know if you've ever taken one of these courses, but I took a course, like an online kind of course from University of Regina Pride organization. And I took it to find out what was in it because some of our teachers were taking it and that kind of thing. Right. And so a couple of us took it to just get a sense for right. And here's the thing. Everyone knows what answer you're supposed to check. Right. Right. So how do you feel being forced to check a whole bunch of answers that you don't agree with? And let's say it's not even the case like, oh, they want you to check A, but you would have checked B. No, you'd be like, this question is unfair and coercive, and I don't like any of the answers, right? Like that kind of thing. Right. But you know that they want you to check A, so that's what you check, right? Yeah. And then you do all that, you jump through all the hoops. Anyone can pass one of those things because it's plain. You don't actually have to learn anything to pass them because you already know the answers they want.
Correct.
How does that affect your relationship with the people who you're supposedly being reconciled with? If what you feel is for you to keep your job, you need to make a farce of your conscience and go through this sort of coercive process that is pretending to be value neutral while doing this to you, of course it's going to backfire. Now, I think we actually do need something like sensitivity training. If it didn't have all the connotations it has from the way that it's actually practiced in the real world, is actually like a good thing. Like, do we want more sensitive or less sensitive people? Well, if we could have training that would get us more sensitive people, amen. Like,
amen. Exactly. Right? That's the thing is I don't disagree with this stuff, like in that regard, like the intention. Yeah. Respect for diversity. I'm fine with that also. Like, not just fine with that. We need to make sure that we have respect for diversity.
Exactly.
But to the point that you're making.
Performative and counterproductive.
And counterproductive, right? Which leads then to the reason why all the top Republican candidates are writing anger, as their kind of platform. I mean, it's because they're just tapping into that zeitgeist within that population. Right. That's just what it is. Right. Yeah. So, okay, this isn't great.
But I mean, and you wonder, like, what does this have to do with the book? But it's actually, I think a Catholic education really has an opportunity to undermine a lot of the polarizing forces at play in our culture because of the way we think about things. Like, a Catholic education has to engage people in their freedom.
Amen.
If you don't engage people in their freedom, you're not doing education. And so my book is really
I say the same thing about
interested
counseling,
in
by
that.
the way. I just need to say,
Absolutely.
I say the exact same thing about therapy. Like if you are not respecting the free will of your clients, you're not doing therapy. You're doing something else. You're doing manipulation.
Right.
But if you're like, you have to like, that's where this thing starts, is recognizing that there's a freedom that this individual has. And we have to be very cautious and respectful of that.
Right.
Keep going.
Yeah. And whether you're counseling or teaching or parenting,
Yes.
every time you draw down on the bank of freedom, the interest you pay on that, because you're going to have to pay that sucker back, and the interest is huge. Right. And I mean, nobody knows that like someone who sits in an office doing counseling, right? When you do marriage counseling, how often is the story that some people are working against some unfreedom that was set up in their childhood? Like 98%. I mean, like some huge percent, right? You can't draw on that bank without paying back big later.
Right.
Societally or personally.
Right? That's it. All right, so let's kind of get to bring this back. This has been great, man. I love it. I knew we were gonna have a great conversation. I just knew it. I was so grateful. I was like, this is gonna be wonderful. So
Awesome.
Let's get back to just education specifically. So if we're trying to readdress some of these presuppositions, we talked about the need for having clarity with regards to them, because if we don't have clarity, then we don't really know how we're going to operate, and then we're going to see other things as threats, and then those things are going to have unintentional consequences. But if we can have clarity about what it is that we're doing, then actually is not indoctrination. That actually helps us to be a little bit more focused about what our objectives are, and then from there we can start talking about the specific strategies and practical elements related to the work that we're engaged in. So your book is written for educators specifically. And so let's start with that question then. What is the role of education?
Right. Yeah. So I would say from a Catholic point of view, you have your first goal is like, okay, let me ask the question. This is the title question of the first chapter. And
I know. That's why I'm kind of working with it.
Yeah.
What is the goal? What is the goal of education? Right.
Right. So the question is, what are people for? And so the goal of any education is going to be shaped by what you think people are for. If you think people are ultimately for the state, right? You're forming citizens. And that's one answer, right? People give to education is like, it's the formation of citizens. That's why the state has an interest in it. And closely related, right? We're forming people for the economy. We're making cogs for a machine that's going to run and have these certain, desirable outcomes, right? And if you think that's what people are for, then your education will be shaped by those presuppositions. If you believe with St. Augustine, that God has made us for himself and we are restless until we rest in him, if our final end is God, then an education's final end is God, which means, and it's the seek ye first principle, right? If we seek that one, then like the jobs and the citizenship, those are all goods, and their education is properly concerned with those goods. But if they're made the highest good, they lose their meaning. And then like, so why should I have a job? What's the end of that? What am I about, right? Why should I be a good citizen? What's the right? I need a bigger picture in which to order these other goods, which are genuine goods, but which are not ultimate goods. And so if in a Catholic education, we say our role here is actually to bring one another to God, right? And then these other things follow, but then it also means that an education isn't primarily about skills. It isn't primarily about knowledge. Those things are valuable, but they're not even the first order. It's about virtue. You want to form people who can live well, and who can live well when they have a lot of money and when they don't have a lot of money, right? And who can live well when the political situation is to their liking and when it's not, and who can live well when they're healthy and when they're sick, and right? And it's virtue that gives you the capacity for that, but it's also where you're already striving for heaven and working towards becoming that person that God created you to be. So that's like the interface, between the heavenly goal and the earthly goals, which are both legitimate, is virtue. And so thinking, as teachers, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to make people who can have good jobs? Well, yes, but I'd actually rather graduate someone who can live well, whether they have a good job or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what if teachers think that that's not their role, that their job is, I'm just a math teacher. Let's keep picking on the math teacher. And my job is just to focus in on that. And most people don't do that. I know that. I know that most teachers sign up to be teachers, especially like middle school teachers. I think every middle school teacher gets a fast pass to heaven. I know what I was like in middle school, and I just pray for anybody who says, this is what I want to do for my life. I'm like, it's just God bless you. God bless you for being a middle school teacher. But who think that, okay, this is great, but it's outside of my purview. So how do you find that balance of saying, okay, I want to educate and form people? I think you say this in the book, not just information, but formation. I want to form people to make sure that they are growing in their faith and understanding. But man, I still got to just teach algebra. They got to get the concepts down of geometry. They got to know the difference in triangles. We got to get this information across also.
Right.
So there's some subjects where the points of connection may not be as obvious in terms of seeing those two. Where it's like, yes, we're forming, but we still need to make sure that the subject matter itself is conveyed.
Right.
How do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the first sort of part of the question, we don't pay teachers well enough to have people there who don't really care about the bigger questions, right? Because of the way we pay teachers, we more or less guarantee that most of the people there care about bigger questions than just whether or not their kids can pass the math test. Of course, people get burnt out and cynical and whatever, that happens too. But there's an idealism at the heart of most people who go into teaching that I think you can tap into for these things. But then the second part of your question, I think, goes to something about the legitimate methodological independence of the subject areas, right? So on the one hand, we're saying we want to be intentional and cognizant of the kind of goals and presuppositions we're bringing into math class. On the other hand, we're not saying that the content of math class should be altered so as to be more or less about these goals and presuppositions, right? So you're doing the presuppositions in the background all the time when you're teaching your triangles, and so the trick is to not think of it as one more thing to do, right? Adding extra content so much as it is of the way you do the things you're already doing, right? But one danger, how I said earlier, isn't this indoctrination? Well, one answer is if you do it wrong. You can do it wrong. You can do it in these kind of arbitrary, artificial ways. And maybe this goes to your quote from Pope Francis too, about the Catholic veneer. If you transgress the appropriate methodological disciplines, you're actually undermining your own project. So I'll give two examples of this from two different subject areas. This one touches on your work, right? Let's say we're dealing with mental health questions in our health class. And the teacher says, you know what, therapy is a waste of money. It's a scam. You should just pray about it, right? Now, by all means, pray about it. I'm not saying don't pray about it, right? But to frame that as an alternative to legitimate professional medical intervention is a false framing, and it's very dangerous, right?
And I know a lot of people who say that statement, so I'm just gonna put that out there. But yes, keep going with your point. Yes.
And I bring it up because it's not an uncommon statement in churchland to have people say, you just pray about these things and they go away. And then you put people in a terrible bind, because what happens if that doesn't work? Were they not praying correctly? Does God not care about them? The outcomes from this spiritually are very dangerous, right?
Very
Never
dangerous.
mind from a mental health point of view of not getting the help you needed. Spiritually, you're sawing off the branch you're sitting on here. So it's very dangerous. But another one is, if you look at the news stories whenever teaching creationism or intelligent design in schools is in the courts. You'll have Catholic experts testifying, and they're testifying against teaching intelligent design or creationism in science class. And what are the Catholic experts doing when they do that? They're upholding the methodological independence of the sciences. Because one of the problems with something like intelligent design is it's, whether you want to argue whether it's good or bad science, in a certain way, it's not science. Mm-hmm. It's actually bringing something outside of the science. Now, there's the opposite danger, which is that people do science proper and then imagine that science is more than science, and then pretend that science is philosophy and answers all kinds of questions that science isn't equipped to. But intelligent design is doing the reverse and imposing a kind of worldview onto the experimental data instead of letting it speak for itself. Both, pray away the mental health issue or impose the worldview on the scientific data are crossing methodological lines. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you're not doing Catholic academic integration. You're doing something closer to indoctrination, right? And so the content of science, math, whatever it is, retains its importance and its independence, in fact, mm-hmm. In a certain way. But what we want to say is its independence does not mean that it doesn't exist. The way we approach it doesn't exist within a worldview. It means that you can't take properly scientific questions and answer them with theology. These are distinct disciplines for a legitimate reason, right?
Yes. Preach it, Brett. Preach it. Hey everybody, this is Dr. Mario Sacasa taking a quick break from my conversation with Dr. Brett Salkeld. Just encourage you to check us out at faithandmarriage.org. We have a number of great resources available on the website for you. If you are interested in dating, please check out Dating Well. If you're looking for a wonderful marital enrichment series, check out United in Love, United in Christ. Or if you just want to join us for an upcoming marriage retreat, we have the full list of those available for you at faithandmarriage.org. We would love for you to stay connected with us, to make yourself available to the resources that we have for you. So please check us out at faithandmarriage.org. I'm with you, man. But I think just the very fact that we talk about it, I think I understand where the hesitation is. The fear is that if we start talking about bringing Catholicism, Christianity into the schools to this degree, that's the foregone conclusion. That right there, what you said is inevitably what's going to happen. Well, just pray it away, or the God in the gaps, God, just intelligent design. Look at all this, and that doesn't then take the disciplines themselves serious. And you and I are both in 100% agreement that is false and dangerous, particularly with the mental health stuff, like you just said. I mean, I've talked about this a lot on my show, my concerns with healing prayer, and at least the way it's kind of discussed in kind of a modern context, because I feel, particularly as you said, that it gets really into some kind of dangerous grounds. Not the purpose of today's podcast, but just to be able to say that, that's not what we're speaking about when we talk about kind of Catholic academic integration or an integrated education system, is to say, no, it's like there is a place where we know where the lines are. Back to the point that we've been making this whole episode, is that the more that you actually know where you stand, the clearer it actually is for you to know where the lines are and aren't. Then you know what questions your discipline is equipped to answer and which questions your discipline is not equipped to answer. And it's okay to be able to have those distinctions and to not let theology be science or science be philosophy. That's the danger. So I think that's where the fear is for most people, for most, I would say, secular institutions. And so the stance of trying to be value neutral, though, is a farce. It's an impossibility. I understand why they're trying to get there, because they're afraid of moving in that direction. But the reality is that they've moved in a different direction. And the direction they moved in is equally dangerous.
Right.
Because they haven't been honest with themselves to assess really what their values are and what the direction is that they want, or they have been, and it's been a hidden agenda, which would be more nefarious. And I try not to get into conspiracy, so we'll go from there.
Well, so here's an example going in the other direction, right? So if creationism is one kind of methodological imposition, during the pandemic, we have people generally from one side of the debate who I agreed with, by the way, on a lot of questions, but they would say something like, follow the science, or I believe in science. And what happens generally when you say that is you're actually
pause. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Pause. Have you seen Nacho Libre?
No.
Oh, I just watched this with the kids. Oh my gosh. No, Brett, you got to watch it. It's a ridiculous, silly movie, but there's a character in it who that's his stance. And he always says, I believe in science. And so he just, every time I hear it, I'm sorry you don't catch the joke, but for anybody who's listening who's seen the movie, if you weren't thinking Esquelito, then I'm sorry. Now I'm thinking it, but keep going. All right. I believe in science. Keep going.
Right. So I believe in science. And this was doing a lot of like subterfuge, because let's take an example like a what's the word I want? Where you require vaccination, like a vaccine
mandate.
A vaccine mandate. That's the word I want. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's think about a vaccine mandate, right? Now, you and I, let's just take, for example, let's say you and I are equally convinced that a given vaccine is safe and effective, right? And the science is clear. Let's say in this, like, the science is clear, the vaccine is safe and effective. If I go and say the science is clear, the vaccine is safe and effective, therefore this mandate is justified, I've skipped a bunch of steps. And I'm implying that anyone who disagrees with me about the mandate is denying the science, but they might not be. They might completely agree with you about the safety and efficacy of a vaccine and think the cost to public trust isn't worth it. That it's going to be impossible to actually impose. Like there's 25 other questions that aren't science questions around whether maybe this isn't morally justified. Maybe I think the vaccine is safe and effective, but I don't think it's morally justified to impose it on people who, even if they're dead wrong, don't think it's safe. Right? Like these are not scientific questions, but when I simply say follow the science, then I'm doing a methodological imposition. Like I'm what's the word I want? Yeah, I'm not respecting the integrity of the method of science, and I'm working in the other direction. And I think if we do Catholic academic integration well, and people actually learn to recognize scientific claims are different than philosophical claims about science or philosophical claims made in the name of science, then when you get into a public debate about something like vaccine mandates, you're just better equipped to make reasonable, honest arguments and to spot ones that are less reasonable and less honest.
Yes. So obviously we're in agreement, and I would imagine most people are, about the things that we're talking about here, and being able to find clarity. Again, that's been the word we're trying to look for moving forward. But my heart goes out. Okay, so the book I know is written particularly for Catholic educators, but my heart goes out for folks who are in institutions that are non-Catholic and that want to know how to bring their faith appropriately into the classroom that would not allow such openness to transpire. And I do have conversations with people who are in higher levels of education, and they deeply struggle, because this wave has kind of come through now. Not even higher levels, I would say at all grade levels. I've had conversations with people who are in public schools, public settings, that are really struggling to find the line, because it feels like the line of connection or of meeting is kind of being lost. The line of agreement, I should say, continues to get smaller and more narrow. And so it becomes harder and harder for people to feel like they can actually continue to do the work that they're doing, even if they are just a math teacher, that even in those arenas, this push is really happening. And so what would you say to that person? What could we offer that individual that's trying to find the right way to do it, but is struggling in an environment where it just continues to feel that it's being imposed upon them, that they're supposed to be acting and behaving a certain way?
Right. Well, let me take two different kinds of cases here.
You got it.
So bring me back around to the second if I don't get there on my own. The first case I'm going to take is a Catholic teacher who's teaching in a non-Catholic context,
Okay.
right? So you're teaching in a public school or university or something like that, right? So my mom was an elementary school teacher in a public system for decades, and she always read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with the kids.
Hmm.
And in the 1970s, when we could basically presume that virtually everyone in the room was Christian, whether they practiced much or not, they shared the worldview. She could say that Aslan was a Christ figure, and she didn't have. A good teacher doesn't say it. A good teacher elicits it, right?
Yeah,
Does
yeah,
this
yeah,
remind
yeah,
you of
yeah.
anything, right?
That's right. That's right.
Anyways, she would have those conversations. They were really great conversations. As she approached the end of her career, there were fewer practicing Christians in her classroom. There were more people who were practicing other religions, and then there were also more people who would be sort of openly hostile to any kind of religious
Hmm.
content at all, right? And she still read the book, and she still talked about Aslan as a figure of Jesus, but she was able to say, like, this is what Christians believe. And the author was a Christian who was writing a story from his worldview. And it was a perfectly legitimate thing to do academically. She
Hmm.
wasn't imposing anything on anyone. If you were a Christian and that was meaningful for you, great. And if you were a non-Christian, you just learned something about what Christians believe. And we don't have any problem learning about what Muslims or Jews believe. Right.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Here's a crazy story. I'll tell it just because it's delightful. My son came home from daycare when we were at the University of Toronto. We lived in student family housing, and the daycare was like the most religiously and ethnically and linguistically diverse daycare I think maybe in the history of the world. Like it was just, you know. And he came home one day and he was telling us all about the story of Hanukkah and the
Mhm.
oil didn't burn out and all this kind of stuff. And there were a couple of Israeli kids in the group, and so we asked him like, "Oh, who celebrates Hanukkah?" Thinking
Mhm.
he would name his Israeli friends, and he goes, "I do." Like, weren't you listening? I just told you that's what we did all day. Like we were celebrating Hanukkah. Anyways, uh, the point is like there was nothing offensive in that at
Right.
all, right?
Right.
So
Right.
at
Right.
one level, if you're just above board and you're just honest that like hey, this is what some people believe and think, and if you want to make meaning with that on your own time, I'm not forcing you, but here's now you know something more about the world that you didn't know before.
Right.
So there is in one level there's a kind of like just be honest and don't pretend to do something you're not doing, and there's probably space, right? So
Right.
that's the easy case. The harder case is not so much around content. In it may show up in content, a counselor being asked to provide counseling for a couple whose relationship you can't approve of in general,
Hmm.
whether because of homosexuality or any other reason for that matter.
Correct.
um,
Yeah. Correct. That's right.
um, and is there space in our institutions for people's consciences? So
Hmm.
healthcare is a huge one. Participation in abortion,
Correct.
pharmacists prescribing or
Contraception, oral contraceptives.
contraception,
Yeah, that's right.
right? All those kinds of things in Canada now. Assisted suicide, right? Participating in an assisted suicide, and what constitutes participation, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Um,
We're not
it
just at
would be
content at that level. We're at practice. We're
right,
we're we're, we're at a
right.
different level. Hmm.
And so sometimes you're being asked to affirm things that you can't affirm.
Right.
And then I mean, you're in a hard spot. And I think the best advice I can give you is find other people in your profession who are working on this. So we get phone calls at the diocese from people in healthcare saying like, this is happening in my hospital or whatever. And, and I can give them some basic advice on like what lines you can cross and can't cross. Sometimes that gets even too fine grained for my particular expertise, and I refer them to a medical ethicist, um, though I know some basics. But then the other thing is there's professional support groups out there. Like there's a Christian Medical and Dental Association,
Hmm.
and they do a ton of great work on like conscience rights for healthcare workers. And it's now getting to the point where, let's say you're a young person discerning a career in medicine, and even the entrance exams
Hmm.
are trying to weed out people of conscience,
Hmm.
who disagree with the zeitgeist. And these associations actually work with young people on things like applications and how to handle those questions and how to like. So I would say look for other people, because you're not alone. It
Right.
might feel like you're alone in your particular situation, but like it's happening all over the Western world, and there are people working on it. And I think there are real wins to be had.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've had some wins for conscience rights, including in the courts.
Yep.
I also think that it's not guaranteed that we win. And if you think about the early church, there were professions that Christians couldn't have, including butchers. You
Hmm.
couldn't be a butcher because all the meat markets were pagan temples where meat
Wow.
was being sacrificed, right? And so it's possible. It's tragic in individual cases, but it's possible that that's the witness that a Christian is called to in a given context. And I know people who've moved on from this career, that career for related reasons. But I'm not going to tell you that's your first thing is like quit your
No,
job.
no, no, no. That's right.
There are professional associations that really work on this. I think that being grounded in a community of hope, it's very tempting for faith communities when we feel oppressed
Mm-hmm.
to become communities of despair, where we
Mm-hmm.
mostly rail against the world and whatever. And that's actually not going to help you in the long term.
Not at all.
It's going to destroy any capacity you have for resiliency and I'll say also creativity.
Yes.
Because if you imagine yourself in a kind of pitched battle, you don't have the kind of creativity that we see in the saints, where these are my favorite saint stories, is when they're up against a thing that looks like a straight up like head-to-head battle, and they somehow like do this sort of spiritual judo where like you end up on the other person's team and make a friend, and you're like, what was that, right? And like that's actually the win that Christians are called to. We're not called to just defeat the evil. We're actually called to like bring everyone on the team, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important for our imaginations to not be too sort of polarized and binary and in good versus evil. But it's really easy to get in that spot because it's really easy to be influenced by media that gets a lot of, a lot of love from the algorithm
Yep.
by
Yep.
promoting that kind of attitude, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I would just warn against that.
Yeah. So I got a story I want to share. Okay. I got a number of things I want to respond, but I got a story the story that I think you're going to appreciate here. So we were talking about like this level of indoctrination, even at the entrance level. Well, that was my experience as I was getting my doctorate. A little bit of background for me. I got my master's in 06. I went back for my doctorate in 14. We moved to New Orleans in 12. And when I was in New Orleans, the first couple of years there, I was working as the director of the Catholic Counseling Service. And so I was charged to create these counseling clinics that integrated the faith appropriately with the work. And so I did this. But to build the team, I needed a lot of counseling interns because we didn't have resources to be able to hire people. So I said, well, what we can do is we can have a two-pronged approach. One is to create services for the population, for the general population that's Catholic integrated. But then I also wanted to train interns who are in secular programs to be able to help them find what those points of connection are. So I did that for a couple of years. Then I felt, it was time for me to go on and get my doctorate. So I went and I did it. Well, one of the school that I applied to, we got a number of interns from that school and I had a great relationship with them. But my reputation certainly had preceded me. And I knew that not everybody on board at the faculty was on board with me coming on, as a doctoral student, because they kind of presumed what my stances were on certain issues. And so I'm going through, my entrance, and one of the things that we had to do during our day of interviews was that we went in twos and we met with each of the professors, and the professor would ask us a question and we would have to each respond to it, have about 5 minutes and move on. And it was kind of like speed dating, so to speak, but with the professors. And so I get to the one professor who I knew was going to be one who was not a fan of my disposition. And so she asked a question to the both of us. She said, there's been a number of issues that we've had with counseling students who have referred clients of theirs, referred out their clients based on, orientation and gender questions and based on religious values, And so she said, as doctoral students, we're going to be asking you to supervise your, graduate students, these graduate students. So how would you handle this case with one of your graduate students if you were supervising them? That's the question that she posed to us in the interview. I turned to my fellow kind of interviewee, and I said, well, ladies first, why don't you go ahead and answer the question? So she answers the question. I mean, textbook, exactly what you would expect her to say, based on the popular narrative. She went on for a little bit, the door knocks, and I was like, oh Lord, this is great. Like, I'm going to get out. I don't have to answer the question. Like, it's time to move on. Right. And but she made a point, because I knew. She was like, no, Mari, I really want to hear what you have to say. Yeah, I bet you do. I know you wanted to hear what I have to say. So I had one of those moments where I was like, I just took a deep breath and I said, come Holy Spirit, And so I said, well, this is what I would do. I said, I would make sure that I have established a great relationship, with my supervisee, and that we've worked on being able to make sure that we have a relationship where and that there's real support and respect that's present there. And then I would have the conversation and see where it goes. That was it.
Right.
That was it. And she said, great answer. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. We'll see you later. Yeah. And move on. And that was it. That's all she needed. She just wanted some type of answer. I didn't answer the question exactly, but I said, here's my framework upon which that I would tackle a challenging situation, that I would, right. I would work to establish rapport, with my supervisee before I challenge them on any issue that they may be facing. And so that was enough to satisfy, her claim. So right. This is, I think, what you're kind of speaking about, is that we have to we can't just wall ourselves off. And that's not what the intention of the book is, or the intention of kind of a Catholic academic integration isn't just to wall ourselves off and create propaganda for the church, as if we need to that's not it. It's that we recognize that our space is in the world, and there's still places and ways that we can do it if we have, the right perspective. Now, even if that does mean it in some circumstances, a loss of a job, that's not exactly what we would desire. Of course, not what anybody would desire, but you try your best to be able to work and navigate. And this is where the witness, of course, the great witness of St. Thomas More, plays in, where this is what I would say to somebody in the circumstances, that if you find yourself in a faculty that is increasingly hostile, then the goal has to be to really work towards finding the points of connection, and really work towards finding those relationships, and then learning how to say what needs to be said, but keeping quiet what needs to be quiet, and only needing to communicate that which is necessary. And that's the Thomas More approach, And so I think that there's ways that we can be able to navigate that, and that the Holy Spirit, of course, is going to guide us in those navigations as well.
And I would say, like, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, a huge avenue where that's going to take place is in prayer.
Yes.
And one thing to help think a little bit about how that works, right? Like, prayer isn't magic. You don't just do it and then you say the right words and then you get answers. And I think most of us have tried to pray like that, and then it didn't work, and we're like, what's going on? I thought I asked a question and I didn't get an answer. Yeah. But one of my favorite definitions of prayer is the practice of seeing a situation from God's point of view. Mm-hmm. And when we're stuck in that, our viewpoint can get very narrow, mm-hmm. because we're concerned with saving our own skin.
Yeah, so anxiety does that, right? Anxiety makes us more narrow-minded. Right. because it draws to attention the fear, the threat response. Like, I have to pay attention to the thing that is threatening, and so we become really focused on it.
Right, and we catastrophize. Right, we imagine all these worst-case scenarios, most of which never come to pass. Right, and I think we all know that we've done that. And one of the things prayer can do is sort of get us out of that space where the concern for our immediate, fear is the driving thing. We say, God, what are you doing? God, you love these people. What are you doing? What do you need from me in this time and place? And then the possibility for creative responses becomes much wider than if we're caught in our own sort of fear cycle, right?
Amen. Okay. So back to the book, the need, this is great. I have a number of great questions that I want to ask you, but this is tying into everything we're speaking about. One of the things that you properly address in the book is that because we have fallen into a meaningless age, like this message of utility and materialism has not won, but it's the dominant narrative in the education system. It's like,
right.
we're only here to raise productive citizens, meaningful contributors to the economy, that those things, in the end are lesser than the greatest goods. But because we have zeroed out any conversation about these deeper questions, the unintended consequence is that this young generation is just bored. They're bored with the answer. And I thought that you gave a great response to that, which is to say, the reason that we're seeing this rise in boredom and this rise in anxiety among young people is because we have negated these larger conversations, and we're trying to, again, use science to be philosophy when it's not. We're trying to talk about, I believe in science. How do you believe in science? What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. Like that's not a real statement.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
Who doesn't? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's not a deeper claim of the reality of the world, in existence and in reality itself, So like those questions that are deeper that science can't answer, or that math itself can answer, or any of those things, that if we're not speaking about them, or at least giving room for them, then we're stifling our students, and we're in some ways cutting their knees out from underneath them. We're preventing them from even being have the opportunity to imagine, bigger questions, which means that their imagination is only resting on the temporal things. And when your imagination only rests on the temporal things, well, after a while you get bored, right? You can be on YouTube for 3 hours, and at some point you're going to get bored. At some point, like, you're going to get bored by what you're seeing. I mean, there has to be more than just what is being presented to us. And so the reason that we need to be able to have these conversations is so that we can inspire again, and not in some cliche cat poster type of way, but in a sincere, meaningful, substantive way.
Right. How many people would read The Lord of the Rings and say, Frodo, you just inherited like Bag End, right? Like, that's a sweet joint, right? Yeah. Like, this is what every hobbit aspires to. You're like wealth and comfort, and you've got like 80 years to live this out, right? Mm-hmm. Right. You've got the worldly goods at the start of the story. You've already got the worldly goods. You inherited everything you're going to need materially for the rest of your life. You could, do some gardening and blow some smoke rings, right?
And drink some beer.
And drink some beer, right? And all of us are like, no, go on the adventure, right? And why do we want to read that book, and why do we keep turning the pages? Because we'd rather be involved in an adventure that means something than be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And so when what we're sold as the end of our life is basically sort of creature comforts, it's not enough motivation, right? And so what we see among young people is a few interesting sort of patterns, right? There's different patterns you might fall into. You might work yourself to death, right? So we have a group of young people who are anxious about their prospects and who just work until they burn out.
Yep.
Right. So we see that. We see young people who live a substitute life. So instead of like real accomplishments, we have video game accomplishments, and instead of real relationships, we have porn relationships. And everything is virtual because you can kind of get away with it. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're a wealthy enough society. You can live in mom's basement for a long time and basically get your needs met and have sort of ersatz versions of, worldly success and mating success and whatever else. And then you have, interestingly, and the older generation is just completely baffled. You're getting a bit like religious fanaticism, right? Because what the older generation was told was like, religion is on the outs. Right. And it's going to be replaced by, it was for people who didn't have their material needs met, so they needed some God, or it was for people who didn't know enough about how the world worked, so they needed a God to fill in those gaps, right? That was what religion was. And so as prosperity and scientific knowledge increase, religion will decrease. And we see an increase in some kinds of religious practice and a particular increase in a kind of fundamentalism. And we say, where does that come from? Well, if you tell people that their life is meaningless and then someone else tells them, actually, no, I got something worth living and dying for, what are they going to pick? Mm-hmm. And this is why when I listened to that teacher in Ontario haranguing these kids about their hateful, disgusting families and religion, I just thought, what I'm hearing on the recording is the polite, thoughtful, careful kids who are engaging with the teacher. How many kids are sitting in the back with their hands in their pockets, thinking to hell with all this?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
why do American kids who aren't even Muslims join ISIS?
Mm-hmm.
But it happens because here's actually something that says, something is worth something.
Mm-hmm.
Your life is
Mm-hmm.
worth something.
Mm-hmm.
And if what we've told them is their life is, worth a kitchen reno, I mean,
Right.
like, who cares?
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's what we're seeing, and that's
Yeah,
unfortunately what we're seeing. And that's why we're seeing a fundamentalism, that's at the poles. And so I would say a
right,
radicalism, a radical left and a radical right in that regard, that this radicalism, even on the left, which then says that, well, then what you should do is you should put all your efforts behind a cause. And
right,
if you put all your efforts behind that, then that, and again, I have nothing wrong with devoting yourself to a mission. I believe that, but as long as that mission again is anchored in something deeper, but it does take that desire and it pushes it, in a way that it's like, well, then, I'm going to go on my crusade for the climate, or a crusade for transgender rights, or whatever it is, and I'm gonna this is what I'm gonna be doing, making sure that everybody's recycling and all that stuff, and again, like, I'm not saying. All I'm saying is we have to caution this extremism. And when we
right.
don't have clarity, this has been the point we've been making the whole time, is that when we don't have clarity, we tend to move,
Right.
into poles,
One
into
of the
extremes.
fascinating things about both the hard right and the hard left is that they both tend to be low religiosity
Hmm.
by standard traditional measures of religiosity. Now, my read on that is actually what you've got there is just alternate religiosity, not
Right.
non-religiosity, right? It's
Right.
the same impulse. I need to make sense out of my life with something that matters,
Right.
right?
That's right. And so that's why you have to make sure that the things that you matter, in fact, are the things that matter.
There you go. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that they are, that the goods that you're willing to go pursue are in fact the greatest goods worth pursuing. And
Right.
so
Right.
if we can get those things situated, if we can get that ordered appropriately, well, then, go do what you're supposed to do,
Right.
which brings us
So
back to why we need kind of this Catholic academic integration.
So let me circle back to the point
Fire.
about virtue from the very beginning, right? If the
Mm-hmm.
goal is virtue, here's one of the problems with political movements that are extremist, that they're going to change the world, right? What's the line? Everyone wants the revolution, no one wants to do the damn dishes. Uh, it, right? If the focus is virtue, you change the world first and foremost by changing yourself, right? But if the focus is, I don't know, family, property, and tradition on the one hand, or social justice on the other hand, I don't take your pick.
Right.
If
Right.
if those external values are the highest thing, and they need to win, uh, because if they don't, the world is over, right? And that's the rhetoric. I mean, I'm not exaggerating that on both sides. It's sort of like, this is like apocalypse level. This matters
Correct.
at this, right? And
Correct.
if we don't win, and so once that's the narrative, once we must win, once if this cause fails, it's the end of the world, literally. And
Mm-hmm.
that's right. I mean, I have solar panels and I recycle. I'm all environment, right?
That's right.
But like, once the narrative is, if you don't do this right, it's the end of the world, then you can justify just about anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and what you can do though is you can let people off the hook by thinking that they can change the world by believing the right things and liking and sharing the right posts on social media
Oh,
and having the right
stop it,
answers to
Brett.
all the hot button questions without ever taking a minute to look at themselves and their relationships and their right. It's something to be lectured, by Hollywood stars about what makes good relationships. but we live in a culture where that's what happened, right? When people whose interior and personal lives are a disaster can give sort of moral lectures. That's the culture we live in, because it's not been about actually interior change and growth, but it's actually just about saying and doing the right things in a public forum. And you're going to undermine any good that your movement seeks if the people in charge of the movement can't sort of order their own lives.
Yes.
Soapbox, get off the soapbox. There we go.
No, man, I love it. I absolutely love it. I love it because it's the tension, Christ reminds us repeatedly, that it's a narrow way. It's a narrow gate. It's narrow. It's small. It's like, it's there. It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man, to get into heaven. It's riches, not even just in the sense of like material, but it's like haughtiness. It's this sense that we have it figured out, that we have the answer, we have the way, but we can deceive ourselves, which is why pride and vanity sit at the top of the list, and gluttony and lust are down there. Like we have to be. It's so much more insidious to fall in love with our own agenda, and it's so much more confusing.
Right.
And so we have to be humble but not afraid, but walking and constantly testing and making sure that our formation is intact and that we are moving forward, and still on that narrow way, because we can convince ourselves that we are, even when we're well off of it.
Right.
And so yeah, okay. I don't know what all has to do with the book, but it does. I know there's a connection.
If you read the book, you'll see the connection. I've had people read the book and be like, "Were you talking about this when you said that?"
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Education does end up connecting with everything, right? If what we're doing in our Catholic schools is either training social justice warriors or the opposite of the social justice warrior, then we're just playing the wrong game. Right. And then it becomes propaganda. I actually, in my chapter on art, I have a section on propaganda.
Yes.
Where I distinguish art from propaganda, as art seeks the true and the beautiful, and propaganda seeks power.
Right.
And you can make a film or a painting or a sculpture, and it's still a sculpture, but it's not art in a proper sense if its goal is control.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, Brett, this has been lively and delightful. I'm so grateful for the time that you've given to me this afternoon. If people are interested in educating for eternity, what's the best way that they can do that?
I always recommend go to a publisher's website or a local Catholic bookstore. The big aggregators like Amazon put such a squeeze on Catholic publishers and writers and bookstores, that if you can support those people who are really invested in the work of Catholic publishing through buying from their website or their bookstore, by all means do it. And if your local Catholic bookstore orders one for you, it might be a better deal for them to order 5 and keep them on the shelf. And so you might be helping the publisher and the writer and the bookstore all by having that there. So that's my recommendation. People, if they have other ways of getting it, they already know. They don't need me to tell them.
Well, then we'll put a link to our Sunday Visitors website.
There you go.
Directly, so that people can click on that, in the show notes. Well, Brett, final question I ask all my first-time guests: what gives you hope?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, there's the general, like, when everything looks crazy, it's sort of like things have always been crazy, and we've got through it before, and God's the one in charge, not me. So even if I screw it all up completely, the damage I can do is limited. So in a certain sense, there's just this sort of like God's in charge gives me hope. At a more specific level, my kids, you have Stanley Hauerwas, famous ethicist, Christian theologian, ethicist, says that having children is an act of hope. Because, you don't know what, you hear this language, like, I couldn't bring a child into the world today. What world would you bring one into? I mean, like when?
At what point in history? When in history was it good enough? Was it safe enough?
Like 1955. That was the only time it was reasonable to have a child. Like, what did you think?
No.
You know, but children are not people who are just supposed to inherit something good. Though by all means, let's leave them. You know, leave the world better than we found it if we at all can for our children. But like, they're active agents. You know, they're gonna do real stuff. And you know, you look at, you know, environmental questions and population questions and that sort of thing, and people worry about, you know, having kids in that light. And I'm like, no. Kids are the solution to that problem. They're not the problem, right? Now, I mean, we all have freedom, and some of us are going to make a mess, and well, that's, you know, that's the nature of the game. But like, I'm watching my kids grow up, and I'm like, they are exciting. They're like, God had something in mind when he thought up, you know, a Toby or an Oscar or a Daisy or, you know, and seeing what that thing might be. You know, you get these little glimpses as they grow up, like what the little thing that makes them tick, or the special gift that they have that you wouldn't have guessed or whatever. And you're like, no, God's going to put that to work first, you know, and do something awesome with it. And so like, yeah, that's a really tangible, you know, the first answer I gave you is fairly theoretical. It's real, but this one is like a very tangible, like, nah, we're going to, something good stuff is happening, and more good stuff is going to happen. And, you know, is the world getting worse in some ways? Sure. I think it's Hans Urs von Balthasar said the world's always getting better and always getting worse at the same time. And if you think, you know, like, if you think that through and like look around, you're like, no, that makes sense. So like, don't get on the despair train, because there's real good out there, and I see it in my kids more easily than I see it almost anywhere.
Amen. Do you have any teenagers yet?
I do.
Yeah,
I have two teenagers, and this is a new game, man. It
is. The reason I bring it up is in the context of hope, because I have two. I have a 19-year-old and I have a 15-year-old, and my 19-year-old's already finished his first year in college, so adulthood is there. You know, he's there. You know, but even my 15-year-old, my 13-year-old, my 15-year-old, and even when my oldest was at that age, there are moments where you saw like adulthood bubbling. You know, like you saw like a shift in the thought or the way they answered the question. I was like, oh, okay, I see it. It's behind your eyes. It's almost there. You know what I mean? Like it's emerging, you know, and I want to fan that, you know, I want to blow on that flame. I want to, you know, my goal here is not for you just to be coddled under my wing for the rest of your life. Like I want you to thrive in this crazy world. Right. And I can see it, you know what I mean? I can see it, like it's there. And when you see that, man, it's awesome. It's really awesome.
Our summer holiday is family camp, and lots of the kids grow up going to this camp every year, and then they get to a certain age and they can be counselors, and then they'll stay for the rest of the month, because the first week is family camp, but then after that it's boys and girls camp, and then they stay on as counselors. So we got to watch Toby and Oscar at family camp. They weren't with our family. They were now counselors, and they stay in and they sleep in the bunks with the counselors. And then they're assigned tasks that aren't with our family. So we were in the location with them, but we weren't with them. We were having our holiday more or less with the 5 younger kids and watching Toby and Oscar from afar. And they were just in their element, like just watching them. Oscar was teaching catechism and Toby was on the maintenance crew. And it was, you kind of were like, yeah, we're kind of done. Like they're good. They're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Send them out.
Send them out. So, that's hope. Yeah. That's hope.
It was very hopeful. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen. Well, Brett, I appreciate the time, and God bless you. And yeah, man, just keep up the great work that you're doing.
Always great to talk to you. Let's do it again.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right, everybody. Well, that does it for my conversation with Dr. Brett Salkeld. As you can see, it was a wonderful, free-flowing conversation where we went in some little tangents there that really are not addressed in the book. But just a beautiful conversation to see how important it is for us to get this education question right, because the concept of education is so much more than just a conveying of data. It is really about how we form our youth and being able to help them to understand what are the things that are the most important in life. And so we want to encourage people wherever you are. God bless you. So thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast, and have yourselves a wonderful day.